If you guys have been following my channel for long enough, you know that I really like Joe Milton. I think this is probably the 4th or 5th video I've done on him on this channel, as I started following him back in high school, and one of my first popular videos on the channel back in 2020 was hyping him up for his career at Michigan. Since then, he ended up flaming out for the Wolverines, got benched at Tennessee, got a ton of hype at Tennessee, then had a somewhat interesting season at Tennessee, and is now considered a Tier 2 or Tier 3 draft prospect. I'd say ultimately he'll probably end up in that 6th or 7th round range, but Joe Milton has a cannon for an arm, and that is why he has a chance to make it. In today's video, we're going to talk about Joe Milton again. We're going to go through his entire story, how he went from a Cam Newton-like prodigy at Michigan to now a late-round draft prospect who has the chance to have the best arm in the NFL. Before we get started though, be sure to subscribe to the channel if you love college football, leave a like if you support today's video, and let me know what prospect or quarterback I could cover next. Now let's get started and talk about the insane rise of Joe Milton. For whatever reason, everybody likes certain players and gives some players the benefit of the doubt. I guess that it's just me and Joe Milton. I think the guy is absolutely awesome, and in a perfect world, I want him to be a franchise quarterback at the next level. Going back in time, Joe Milton III has always been an athlete. He started playing football when he was only 5 years old, and actually when he grew up, one of his hobbies was chasing rabbits through the Everglades. Kind of a random hobby, but it helped him become agile. Interestingly enough, he's also related to former NFL wide receiver Anquan Boldin, so the fact that he originally played wide receiver makes a ton of sense. Eventually though, he'd end up switching positions as he would move to Orlando, and then went to Olympia High School. That school famously produced big-time quarterback DeAndre Francois just a few years earlier, and when he got there, he switched to QB and immediately made an impact on the field. One high school coach told him, quote, "Nobody in the world looks like you. You look like an action figure." He eventually lit his high school on fire as he was an athletic freak, but his coach was somewhat cautious. He was worried that him getting recruited so early would end up hurting his education, so he actually tried to hide Joe from scouts the best he could. I don't know if I agree with that or not, but it didn't end up working. During his junior year, he threw for 1,500 yards and 17 touchdowns, and combining that with his rocket for an arm, he got his first offer from Iowa State. By the time he was a senior, his arm was no secret anymore. But some scouts were worried about his accuracy. One scout said, quote, "Right now, he's like a pitcher with a 100-mile-per-hour fastball who needs to develop his other pitches." A whole bunch of Power 5 teams wanted Joe though, as according to 24/7 Sports, Milton was a 4-star recruit, the number 9 pro-style quarterback, and the 204th best player in the class of 2018. One of those teams that wanted them was Michigan, who offered both him and Dorian Thompson-Robinson. DTR was a 5-star recruit and would eventually end up committing to UCLA. Joe ended up going to Michigan over Georgia and Florida, and this was a huge get for the Wolverines. Harbaugh was excited to get him on campus, and when he was at Michigan, he really wasn't bothered by the competition that would await him. At the time, Wilton Spate, Dylan McCaffrey, and Shea Patterson were on the roster, and he would end up developing and continuing to get better throughout the years. Going into 2020, many thought the job would be between him and Dylan McCaffrey, but McCaffrey unexpectedly transferred away, so Milton, I guess by facto, got the start. He ended up throwing for 1,077 yards with 4 touchdowns and 4 interceptions. He started 5 games during that 2020 season and was eventually benched in favor of Cade McNamara, who started that game against Rutgers. Unfortunately, during that time, he suffered an injury, had a 3-game losing streak, and the way that Michigan fell apart was not good. But truth be told, he had been playing with a torn ligament in his throwing hand, but the media didn't care and basically ripped him to shreds. His former quarterback coach said, quote, "He was trying to be a warrior and to fight through it, but it was everything. Imagine trying to hold a football and you can't feel it. You can't put pressure on it with your thumb. That's going to make you unsure as a passer." You look at how he played at Minnesota, and people are asking, why did he have such a drop-off after that? Well, what do you think happened? His ligament was torn. In total at Michigan, he was somewhat disappointing as he threw for 5 touchdowns compared to 6 interceptions. Wasn't exactly the greatest quarterback in Michigan football history, but now he'd be off to a new school. He decided to leave Michigan in 2021 after spending 3 years there, and he wanted to be closer to home and make it easier for his family to see him play. And he also really liked Josh Heupel, Tennessee's offense, and their coaches. He decided to commit to Tennessee, and then offensive coordinator Alex Golesh said, quote, "Joe's incredibly smart, incredibly talented, and he's like as talented as a quarterback as I've ever seen." Going into 2021, Milton would eventually beat out Hendon Hooker for the starting job, but very quickly defenses would adjust to his play, and he once again found himself as the backup quarterback. He continually overthrew receivers, and his game just wasn't polished enough. Hendon Hooker had a huge breakout 2021 season, and then followed that up with a ginormous 2022 season. Milton didn't pout or transfer though. He remained a strong leader, was the backbone of that quarterback room, and gained respect from all his teammates. He knew his time would potentially come, as when Hendon Hooker went down against South Carolina, Milton was back in action. His first start would come against Vanderbilt, where they won 56-0. That was great and all, but Milton's Orange Bowl performance against Clemson is where he really began to stand out. In that win over the Tigers, he threw for 251 yards and 3 touchdowns. He also had that pass that pretty much went into outer space, and everyone was talking about Joe Milton for 2023. Because of everything going on in 2020, he had that extra year of eligibility, and he decided to use it. Could he be like Kenny Pickett and save his career and go off to the NFL, or would he flame out? Well, honestly, it seemed it was somewhere in the middle. At times, he looked great, and at other times, he looked like he really hadn't improved. In his final season at Tennessee, he ended up throwing for 2,800 yards with 20 touchdowns to just 5 picks. While those numbers were solid, he really did disappear in a few games and was especially atrocious against Mizzou. He did have his moments though, and led Tennessee to a pretty decent season, and led Tennessee to a good season. In total at Tennessee, he threw for 32 touchdowns with 5 picks and just over 4,000 yards. He won't go down as Peyton Manning, but he also won't go down as Quentin Dormady either. Following his 2023 campaign, he obviously had to head off to the NFL draft, where he's now being talked about as a guy who could go later in the draft. Pretty quickly, I'm going to give you a scouting report for him, as we're going to talk about his biggest strengths and weaknesses. The biggest asset Joe Milton has to offer is his arm. Typically, teams are willing to look past a player with an accuracy if the guy has elite arm talent. Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen had heavy question marks going into the draft, but the one place they didn't have question marks was their arm. Now they're considered 2 of the best quarterbacks in the entire NFL, and he can make some of these same throws, or at least has the potential to. He's had a great ability to have a deep ball if the play breaks down, his pocket presence is solid, and he's shown he has decent vision for college. He only threw 5 picks at Tennessee, and he started a year and a half there pretty much. Another thing that'll help Joe in the league is definitely his frame. He's 6'5" and 235 pounds, which makes it difficult for an average corner or safety to bring down, and they'll likely have to get to him with linebackers or edge rushers instead. He also has a decent amount of starting experience, and his overall athleticism is great. There are a couple areas where Joe needs to work on though. He doesn't really have that much touch on his deep balls, as he mostly just throws them downfield, hoping a receiver can catch up to them. Unfortunately, he only completed 39% of his passes, in which the play was 10 yards downfield, and while he has enough athleticism to escape the pocket, he is by no means no Cam Newton. He will sometimes force a bad throw instead of taking 5 or 6 yards and a first down. He also has a tendency to throw hospital passes that could get receivers hurt. In general, he has a great arm, but not necessarily the touch to know how to use it. If an NFL team falls in love with his arm and has a great quarterback coach and staff, or at minimum a solid backup. If not, he may not even make the roster. But I do think that there is a place for Joe Milton in the NFL. Scouts don't seem overly impressed with him, but he also has enough upside to make things interesting in the later rounds. He's definitely a good pickup for a team looking to build, and there aren't that many guys who are prized with the arm that he has. I'd argue he's probably already top 5 in the NFL in terms of actual arm strength, but if somehow, some way, someone can get him to be polished, I truly think he would be a threat in the NFL and could be a really good player. He already has that athleticism in that arm, he has a decent amount of experience, and mentally, he does seem to have it. He didn't give up, he didn't transfer, and despite having injuries, he was willing to play through it, was willing to be a backup, and was ready when his number was called. My opinion is also an underrated trait, as a player's mental game is honestly just important in the NFL. There are plenty of guys with great stats, great arms, and great athleticism who've never lived up to their potential because they just didn't have it in their brain. I think Joe Milton has it in his brain, and he also has God-given talent with his arm. If somehow, some way that can be developed, he could be the steal of this year's draft, and many will wonder, how did he slip to this late in the draft? But who knows? What do I know? Maybe I'm just biased towards Milton. What do you guys think? What do you think of Joe Milton? Do you think he has a place in the NFL? And who's another quarterback I should take a look at from this year's draft class? Be sure to let me know down below. Leave a like if you want to support today's video, subscribe if you're new, and check out all my other videos on the end screen. I hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.